Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
Great that you could make it, and really happy that you could join us today, Claes Mikko. As always, we usually start with a very personalized introduction from our honorable guests. So we like to know, who is Claes Mikko?
Yeah. Oh, I could start. My spouse, she's a psychotherapist, so we might get too deep there, but let's do this kind of a startup cozy level. But yeah, so first of all, really nice to be here and join the discussion and share some of the experiences we have, also especially related to deep tech. But yeah, so about myself, so I typically start by introducing myself as a Finnish Norwegian, so born in Norway, grown up in Finland. Combined this kind of a Nordic heart, so that's a speciality. So always loved traveling around and study the Nordic atmosphere and culture. So that's something. And yeah, being family background is in entrepreneurship and being part of doing something in that myself, studies and university, and implementing those academics into some kind of a business development. That's always been close to my heart. So I guess my speciality is that I'm at least in the Finnish culture, I'm quite often joining in as a pitch moderator as well. So I guess it's this kind of a Norwegian side that gives this kind of a relatively positive added value to the Finnish culture of doing a positive approach how to handle big events. So that's maybe something special about myself before we dig into the startup side. You're muted.
What happened here? Okay. Great to know you have a Finnish and Norwegian background and also a family background in entrepreneurship. Is that the reason you jumped into this side of the world, which is entrepreneurship, investments? Yeah.
So especially my dad, so he's always worked his side on building business and very small scale. So I've been, since I remember, I've been part of all the exhibitions and sharing whatever interesting stuff. So I learned the hard way how to find those nuances, how to click and make a closer deal, as we say. So, but the background is that mainly the biggest driver has been frustration. So when there's something that's not really working, or you see an opportunity, so that frustration is being channeled to some kind of a form of action. So so far, all the jobs I've been part of, I built myself. So it's been quite of a, yeah, it's a nice environment. And typically, if you don't like your environment, you can blame yourself. But so far, I've been very lucky to be working with something I enjoy and find interesting every day.
Brilliant. I wrote down the word frustration here. I think that's a great starting point for any entrepreneur. Or if you want to try to make a difference, it's good to look around the problems that surround you and maybe something that is very deeply personal to you. So great to know. I've written down that word here. We'll probably come down with that during the chat. But tell me a little bit about in entrepreneurship, why you specifically chose the VC or the angel side. Is that something that you consciously chose, or it just came your way?
So to simplify, during studies in university, we were quite active there with the community. It's a great time to start anything. So put that academic learning into action. And during my time, that was when Finland had just experienced this kind of the future of decline of Nokia. So we had this kind of a wave of entrepreneurship. And it was a very rapid shift from this kind of a corporate path to actually starting something of your own. And I joined some of these movements as well. I was part of launching in Turku, West Coast city here in Finland, an entrepreneurship ecosystem and society there. And from there started building, worked at Startup Guidance here in Helsinki. From there we noticed like there's a small fraction of the companies that came for guidance requirement. They had something potential, but we had no channel to put them for rapid growth or how to support these companies who had something bigger than just organic growth future. So from there, we started different services. So I've been this kind of a network guy who's been building matchmaking. So that's been my specialty. And from there, seeing the need of private investors and joining in then founding this Finnish Business Angels Network. So my path to the startup bubble has been through networks and building communities, then seeing and doing my best to more or less link those with the interest and need with those who have the opportunity with some resources. And yeah, it's a natural path typically from these kind of startup clubs to networks to then also see the possibility of working for a VC, which then again ends up channeling the bigger resources to these early stage goals.
Excellent. I see a story here. So frustration, and then that kind of heightened up through the Nokia decline and the entrepreneurship. You talked about Turku region, great place. I think a lot of activity happening there, and then that transitioned you into the network guy and then into the community side. So that's a great build up. Let's go into your organization a little bit and talk about NordicNinja VC. And where we could start is like, what's the background and why was there a need to create something like this in Nordics? Or maybe if there are other geographies you are looking at.
Yeah, so great. And thank you for asking. So I would say, as everybody, your own organization is a bit special. So I would claim that for NordicNinja as well. So we're globally quite unique. And so to start with the larger person, so we fulfill as NordicNinja is a it's a 101 million euro fund operating here in the Nordic and Baltic region. We do a bit later stage investment, typically Series A, even Series B, and have the opportunity for seed tickets as well. And deep tech, as we're going to discuss, is one of the opportunities that we can handle. But the speciality is that the capital and the money for investing comes from Japan. So we're backed by large corporates, Panasonic, Honda, Omron, and then the governmental investment bank, JBIC. But what makes us special, we are not a CVC, we're not a corporate venture capital operator. So we are fully independent, we are a VC, we have a local team, we have local decision power, but the added value is that we get to use this kind of a win-win model of operating as an independent VC, but we have this massive gigantic network of big players with a special Japanese twist that are very keen on, especially what happens here in the Nordics, and to find cooperation opportunities. So yeah, so we fulfill and as a mandate goes up even to the largest ministry level to support and inspire Japan to become more startup friendly. So the frustration from Japan's side came that they don't have that active startup ecosystem. We all know SoftBank, but there hasn't been much beneath of the whole ecosystem. So this is one of the initiatives, partly governmental, partly private. How do we go out, activate the ecosystem, put the money in action as well to start benchmarking and comparing Japan and the possibility was to locate the fund anywhere. So Nordics were chosen as it has the demographics is quite similar to Japan. There's the many natural environments that support culture-wise to do the benchmarking. So the luxury and what makes the job really fun is, of course, in addition to finding investment opportunities and growth companies, then we also get to highlight and inspire Japan.
Okay, great. Very, very strong and very comprehensive introduction from you. Now, I'm just curious about like how is your portfolio right now? Is it primarily Nordic? How big is it right now? How many companies have you invested? And if there could be some detail on kind of verticals that you have gone in or the stage, yeah.
So today, since the launch in 2019, we've done 20 investments. So industry-wise, we had the openness and the luxury of deciding what we want to invest in. We don't do games, we don't do life sciences, but otherwise it's open-minded. And our sweet spot is to support the scaling internationally. So when there's local traction to some extent, we see this kind of a 100,000 monthly revenue goal, or we approaching that direction, then our job is there to onboard the larger resources and to help scale. Asia and Japan is of course our speciality, but it's more as a bonus. So there's no requirement whatsoever. So the portfolio companies that we've done so far, there's mobility, there's software, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and health tech at this moment. So quite for a variety of different kind of opportunities. And so far, how should we say, the classic unicorn profiling. So out of the 20, so far 4 have the unicorn profile. So that's always a fun little additional twist for the success so far.
And when you're working, so great to know that you are focusing on internationalization and scaling, which is great for companies which have already raised some capital and now looking for Series A. That's where Series A helps actually. How is so you being a Japanese fund, like you said, it's certain corporates and the government on the background as well. How much have you seen in your portfolio an interaction? So that if there are 20 companies, are they active in the Japanese space in some way? Is there partnerships happening there, or is the partnership happening primarily in Nordics and allied regions?
Yeah, so it's always case by case. So far, the portfolio, about half of the companies have been actively linked with especially Japan or Asia to some form. Some have open offices, somehow just open as a market opportunity. So that's something we've been helping out with. So it's quite a natural element when we join in. We're quite a lucrative co-investor in the Nordic Baltic ecosystem at the moment, because we joined the local terms. We're not scary in the sense we don't have this kind of a corporate strategic guidance or anything. So that is being very helpful. And of course, Asia is a massive opportunity. That is something we know relatively well. But then again, let's say, for example, Einride, the electric autonomous trucks from Sweden, Gothenburg. So we invested there in Series A together with EQT, and that was something leading. And then, of course, the strategy was purely going forward in Europe, then expanding to the US. So Asia, Japan is not even on the map for this successful company yet. But let's see, maybe someday.
Okay. Great. We already have somebody here. Hi, Olga. Background from Japanese corporate Fujitsu within Nordics. Great to have you with us on the chat. Let's go a little bit into the selection process, or how that works. What are some of the key indicators that you look at when you are, like you talked about Einride? And of course, they could vary by each company or each case, as you're saying. But generally, what are some of the pointers that you look at before opening even a conversation with the founding team? Early, how would you say, door openers, which can be for you?
So I said, so in our level, it's already, it gets more boring in the sense. So we already assume that the team is awesome and is building something cool. So we actually look a bit more on the financials and the market opportunities. So the financials, unfortunately, play quite a role. We do study the spreadsheet prognosis, but in the end, it's the trust comes from the relations to the team, the references there so far built, and we mirror mainly. So it's the current traction and then the market opportunity. So our job is, of course, to be futuristic and estimate what is going to be the next big thing. Of course, a very strong thesis in our investment guideline is, of course, to as you mentioned in the beginning, that investing in the world we want to live in. So whatever is causing the world to become cooler and a more sustainable environment, that is a very strong interest of ours. So we're not an impact fund or just purely sustainable, but that is, for example, Japan, there's a huge demand at the moment. Japan also aims for a carbon neutral by 2050, decided last year, and it just exploded amount of interest in companies that have some kind of sustainable element. But yeah, so that is a very positive bonus. But so the typical process, we get a recommendation. We look at the company, there's some traction, some sales, we compare that with our own analysis, and then typically after a few meetings, then magic happens.
Okay, great to know. And just for our audience here, Claes Mikko talked about traction and opportunity, spreadsheets, boring. But when you are at Series A stage, I think that's, as he said, that the team is already awesome and the basics of a startups are already in place, and it's a well-functioning machine going forward. Coming to a little bit on deep tech, we'll go deeper into the topic. is it hard to measure or to put same level of metrics on a deep tech startup? Like you talked about, for example, revenue as one thing. Is that happening, or is it the projection? When you went into these 20 companies, is it that those were traction probabilities assigned, or was there actual traction on ground for deep tech?
Yes, so typically we see some. So a deep tech, as there is something deep, and as the term itself includes, it's something where we can estimate that the revenue will come a bit later, and it requires more resources in advance, and that's where, of course, the industry should be very active in. There's so many opportunities there, and which just all the founders there having a vision and having a possibility and innovation is typically in the Nordics. There's a university-based innovation, which is then again taking time to develop and take it to the market. So we fully understand that. Let's take the case example, Einride, when that investment was done, there was some small traction, but it was not from the business itself. But so what we could see was that there was customer pipeline interest. There was already some level of commitment for when it's ready, then we might be interested customers. So it was just in the urge there to actually make it or break it. And we could see that the financials were going to exactly fulfill that need of a future prospect. So I think that is very important for the deep tech category, that you build something that actually has some level of demand, and that you only get by being active with the market, the dialogue to what is like, there's a saying like letter of intents, that there's a customer prospect that commits to future purchase and so forth, that it's not that valuable because it's just a letter of intent, but it's still, that is something we work a lot with, just to understand where this solution, because we're not the product or service experts, but we can have an overview how large the market is and tapping on the opportunity there. So yeah, so deep tech, we have a longer spreadsheet when we look at the opportunity to actually make it a break even and scale it from there.
Great points. You talked about the pipeline and commitment, and then you came into and pointed about the LOI. Let's try to demystify that. When we talk about the pipeline or the commitment from a VC side, not just because you have experienced a huge repository of experiences in the investment side. When we're talking about pipeline, commitment, or LOIs, what does it mean for startup? Do startups need to have a signed contract with somebody, or is it that they need to have a confirmed email? What would actually make the needle tick in their favor when you're presenting their case to a VC?
The main favorite answer a VC will give you is, as you probably know, it depends. It depends on all the elements. So we're very open-minded. Our job is to be open-minded for everyone. Our job is not to say that this is not working or this is not. So our job is like, we typically never say no. That's also a second issue with the VC. You're very hard to get a no, because we want to see the opportunity to the very end. So, what we actually look at and follow. So it is from the cases we had so far, there's already on the stage quite a good system and a process for contacting prospects of customers and having, and I think everybody here listening as well have been going through the lean model and the whole structure there. So the whole guidance, the main purpose is there, that you don't do what typical Finnish engineers love to do, is to build the product ready and then sell it, but actually get that feedback as early as possible. And the biggest frighten for what we experienced, and maybe a bit from my bubble as well, that startups are protective of the idea, but it is very much not the idea that is the one that's going to take it further. So I'm very much of the openness. So being able to discuss already on the idea stage and being open-minded, because the delivering and being able to fulfill those goals, that is much more important. So from our side, we look at something committed. In which form, that is not important, but more or less understanding that there is a future need.
Okay, great.
Too often we see awesome technology, but especially in the university-based or deep tech, that it is a fantastic solution, but there's just not a problem which it's fulfilling.
Great points, and some commitment. I think I'll pick that word and kind of spin it towards the audience. And then two other things that you said about what kind of answers you will typically expect from VCs. It depends, and not a straight no. So that's also something for our community to reflect on, that it's when you're building relationships with VCs, there is a bridge, and maybe it happens 6 months later when you are in a better shape. So it's a building process, and it's a relationship building process. But
and can I just one more lesson there, because it's very important. Like you will, and the goal for us is, of course, to give as fast and snappy decline as possible. But it's not saying like it doesn't work. That's not the job of the investors. Our job is to support to the very end the entrepreneurs and the vision. But you hopefully you will get a very early decline, that this is not an investment, so we don't spend using your time and leaving you hanging there. So it's very important that you get a yes or no that this will proceed. But and hopefully that decline, that's the guidance that at least from our bubble has been giving. So you're not being left hanging in this kind of loose yes or no. So, but yeah, then again, does it work or not? That is for the market to decide.
Okay, got it. Let's go a little bit deep into the deep tech, because that has already come on the surface. And let's discuss. We have had, I was maybe talking in the very early part that we had the deep tech discussion kind of surfaced in our last talk with Mimi Billig when we were talking about the Nordic tech, and then Per Hedberg was there in the audience as well. And he, in one of his earlier interviews, like more than a year ago on Startup Grind, mentioned that deep tech there is not enough capital here. So let's go slightly deeper into the deep tech space. What's your current reading? Does the infrastructure exist? What's the quality of infrastructure? Are the universities or the research institutes or the grant providing organizations enough to push an idea from its long incubation phase out into the market?
Yeah. So there has been capital available, and it's been a much more efficient, at least everybody I've been discussing, it's getting much better all the time, and there's better services available. Of course, today, being in a very, very, very interesting position and seeing where Europe as a whole, for example, is leading forward to. So the investor sector is more careful. One very concrete example is that the investments, are they done directly in equity or in the form of convertible loans? So it's a promise of future. So at this point, convertible loans are actually less popular. So people want to commit to equity, give a clear ownership, because we have very unclearness on the future. How would these kind of valuations and upraise realize? So that, but in average and general, the community understands very well, and especially on the university level side, that we need to have these innovations taken to business. Concrete examples, that because just in the Nordics where I operate, universities and the immaterial patent rights, and these are owned by the university. In Sweden, then again, it's the researchers themselves who own the rights to the innovation that they make. And we can see that in Sweden, there's an easier tendency to make a business out of these innovations. So once again, keeping individuals motivated and supported, that is very important, and not losing the touch to who actually gets to benefit from the company building.
And how does it work on the VC side? So let's say there's a team working in a university center, trying to build something on which they own the rights. Where does, or what stage does their contact happen with the VCs?
Yeah, so it's not that much the job of the university. So it's always, we are approached by the entrepreneurs. So fundraising, that is the job of the team itself. If you need to outsource this, that is already a challenging element, and that typically happens in a later stage. So when we're talking about PE level, buyout level. So that is this outsourcing is a more opportunity. But what we see is, of course, as we had discussion, it's startup investing. It's about trust. It's an uncertain sector, and that's why it is startup, and we're tapping on a market opportunity and trying to scale that as fast as possible. So the trust element is then again, how do you increase that? And that is typically received with the help of references and universities, accelerators, any institute who can help the individual team and founder to get more trust to speed up the process, because that's why we see these serial entrepreneurs scale really, really fast, because they already have that, the trust correlation is so high. But so it is that is the balance. How do you get enough trust from those counterparts that could potentially be your financiers?
Okay, so trust. I'm marking that as the 5th word of our conversation. Okay, great. Let's also discuss a little bit about how is a typical deep tech startup different from a typical startup? Like, what in your experience have you seen? Is this that there are a different type of founding teams, different periods involved? So maybe if we can discuss that for a couple of minutes.
All right. Yes. So if we, because deep tech and as discussed earlier, we could associate quite strongly with university related innovations and this kind of university related, this kind of science innovation and researchers and those future founders of university environment. We can, it is to simplify, we very often see that the innovations highlighted there, it's about the problem. A typical startup pitch, it's about the solution. We have this and this and this, but when it comes to science, it's more about the problem. And do we actually have the team and a capacity to solve that problem? So it's like angle of how we look at. So it's to super simplify. But as we discussed, like what makes deep tech special is the resources needed. So very CapEx required. So the expenditure in the early stage before any revenue is made, that is quite high. So typically deep tech companies, they make some kind of financial traction with consultation or some kind of expertise in addition to, at least in the Nordics, strong governmental support in form of grants and different packages. So the expectation is, of course, that if we simplify, if we make an investment in a software SaaS company, we could make it in half a year, it could already be profitable and it could be made more or less the upside there. On the deep tech level, we're talking typically about a few years.
Okay, great. So it's a time period that we are talking about. You also talk about university ecosystems and science. Those are the two merging points for these startups, and focus more on the problem, less on the solutions and team and the capacity to solve the problem. And then on the financial side, some sort of consulting or some revenue streams coming from clients for these startups.
You have to, of course, like, how do you make your living during the building phase? And that is, of course, the biggest question always for the founders. And it is the secret is like what we often see, is this going to continue as a consultation business, or is there actually something that can be scaled? What makes simplified, what makes money while we're sleeping? This is like the model for an ideal investment and when it's scaling rapidly. But so how to sustain during that building phase. So hopefully that is something being considered well.
I don't know if you have an answer for this, but do you think, or have you seen deep tech startup teams sticking around, or do you see them frequently break down? Because when the period is long and path is not very clear, and you have to raise some money through consultation and all, maybe that's
So I guess, like, once again, the period we're living in today, we are most likely going to see a bit more of these unfortunate endings. There's a bit less more financials available for as once again, financials there is about the future trust, and it's now very uncertain. So there's a natural step that we're seeing less opportunities in that field. But it is something that it's not too often, but then again, it's what is really positive, it's not seen as negativity or negative thing. So when there's a failure, the first reaction from the bubble, so the bubble has learned also in Europe, also in the Nordics, that when you fail, then you have a huge amount of experience, and typically is that's when the closing has happened or some level of ending, then you call up the founders and what's next. So it is a very lucrative experience that these founders, it's like purifying, and you typically start from scratch again, and the hunger for building something that is, I'm not sure what the percentage is, but if you're not fully burned out, which is a horrible case, but if you actually been able to liquidate or somehow end the company in a agreed way, then there's typically hunger to build something new.
Okay, great points. I'm just looking at chat over here. So what I see is Nazanin from Norway. Entrepreneur, now I'm looking for investor. How can I contact you, Claes Mikko? So, okay, we can, okay to share your contact details or LinkedIn profiles? Okay. Then we have Frederica here. What about games, if it is useful for elderly care, memory care? Besides, it can also attract whole design market.
Well, that's like, if it's a game, then that's different from gamifying. Like gamifying, it's tapping on that human psychology and knowing whatever makes taps an action point. But purely games, that is because it's so hard. Even the game sector investors, they have very hard times to explaining what they actually invest in. Typically, it's purely the people and the team. So most of the biggest investments are done in companies and founders team who have done it before in a smaller scale. So there's nothing that actually can highlight will a game go through or not. So before you get to that kind of a retention level of having customer interest for games, that is a challenge. But from our side, we look open-mindedly, we try to stay open-minded. If there are enough elements that we know that we can help on, there is something that the traction has been building on, then we're happy to support. But traditionally, these have been a bit more, we don't have a direct case where this kind of a game element would be a strong business element.
Okay, great points on developing a gaming startup. I'll rewind a little bit for our audience here. We had Lars Jonro joining us a few months ago from Equity Ventures, and he related a very personal experience here. I'll just repeat that for some of our audience, maybe you were not there. And he said that one of the main reasons behind Candy Crush success was that he himself went through more than 1,000 flash games to kind of I still remember that. I don't know if the number was exactly 1,200 or 1,600. I need to go back and listen to that talk, but I think being into the space itself is very important on how games work, what can be the hook. And I'll probably share that chat with somebody who is working on games. So Frederica, you can reach out to me. I can share the link to you because he talked about a slingshot metaphor in creating a game-based startup. I can share that insight with you. But Claes, I'm going back again. I'm scribbling these notes when you are talking because you sometimes throw out these magic words, and you're talking about the current state. Like when we talked about team formation, would they stick around, and they talked about current times. And that's where I think that got me interested in asking you, when we see the VC environment around us, of course, LinkedIn is generating a lot of insights for everybody. Whoever is on LinkedIn, there's tons of things coming out that this is happening in VC space. The general reading, at least from my side, is that most of the effect is at much later stage. But do you think the stage that you are working in is affected, and stages before you are also affected, especially in context of Nordics in terms of funding as we go?
The global trend was that the bigger players were stepping into an earlier stage. That was at the recent few years that we had, especially from the US, joining in Europe and doing smaller tickets. 10 years ago, the biggest challenge, at least in the Nordic element, was to get A round plus. So B round was an impossibility. So there were very, very few. So now the market is very much more resourceful, and there are different stages are including more opportunities. So the stage where we are, we see that affected as well. What we hear is, of course, more interest towards companies that have some kind of revenue and traction, that those more safe bets are being done. The later stage there is, the more revenue is expected, so B rounds and so on. In our stage, it is concrete that we have potentially there is less companies at this point. We see there's an urgent need for more funding, but it's typically those who are already in some form of activity and need more runway to support. So following investments or just making sure that the existing ones survive. But there has been a Nordic trend due to COVID partly, that there has been less seed stage investments. So these kind of initiatives. And of course, it takes a little time, but this is exactly that period when we see that all those seed stage companies that have not been started due to COVID or other reason, they are now forming less Series A, where you have some traction and you could build. So yeah, the overall numbers have been declining. At the same time, the amount of investments have increased, but the trend is that fewer companies receive more money. So taking more safer bets, and that's why the valuations were very high. So all of those are now taking a bit of a step back at this moment. Okay, got it. And let's go one step deeper into it. If we are at because maybe some of the entrepreneurs here, Zlata, I see you have raised your hand. Do you have a question? We can take it in 5 minutes or so. So, or you can write it on chat. If we go one step deeper into it, and really the idea stage or first stage entrepreneurs who are building up in Sweden. So I'm very closely connected with the Swedish ecosystem. So we have early stage grants possibilities from Vinnova. Almi is a very large player. Companion, for example, is running some innovation checks. Do you think that will also, and I don't know how that is in Finland right now, what kind of organizations are involved. Do you think that will also get suppressed, or that is more or less a guaranteed natural flow of capital or support infrastructure for startups, which are very early, and that will remain immune to all this? Well, thanks to COVID, all the Nordic countries have been hit already with the governmental services, and there was a huge amount of support available. Just Denmark, as an example, they gathered together a huge support package for the startup level, and that was thanks to the grassroots initiatives from those local players. So this kind of a concrete action by this the local ones. But what we see today, because startup sector is associated strongly with this kind of a new creation of taking innovation to action, and through that we get new jobs. And as the traditional industries have been declining, it's said that all the net percentage of new jobs are created by startups, and this kind of, and it's partly true. So we have an issue in the Nordics where jobs in general have been declining from these larger giants, and then the new ones haven't really produced the same amount. But so there is interest from the governmental level to maintain and support. But what that financial resources will, that's to be seen how that's going to stay. But at least we have for the first time, we have massive amount of lobbying organizations speaking on the behalf of these small and early stage companies that aim for large growth. Okay, got it. I'm just browsing through some of the questions now. We have a question from just a second. I'll need to go a little bit up here. Pradeep is asking, hi, earlier Claes Mikko said decisions mainly based on the financial tractions, but later on he said for deep tech, even if not big traction, just founder sustaining during deep tech products building time. Please clarify. Yes, so as mentioned, if we do those sections of what kind of numbers we look at. So in the deep tech category, of course, as we already mentioned, like what kind of prospects, pipeline of prospects do we have, and what has been the feedback there? And then typically this kind of analysis of financials, it is also like, is our investment enough to turn around the company to actually aim for some kind of profits, and what is the timeline there? The classic venture capital fund, the active mandate of 5 years of investments and then 10 years of a total runway. So yeah, it is how deep can the company go? Like this kind of a fusion power plants, that is something we don't see too much of the VCs do. But then again, the biggest newest trend is the micro nuclear company. So that already requires less kind of a timeline engagement. So there is a possibility with these smaller initiatives to build something successful. So yeah, so it is a balance from once again the trust there. How do you make enough of this kind of a pipeline of prospects, and then again the financials.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then let's take one or two more. We have from Tobias. What about investing in robots for construction of industry, for example, 3D printing, concrete printing? Yeah.
Yeah, very like one of the last undisrupted areas is construction technology. It is construction field. It is for many of us who've been building something or have it is very a lot of old-fashioned elements there still. So we're very excited to look at any construction technology regarding innovations there. And 3D has of course been a big talk already for a while. There's some small initiatives here and there, and it's still in general it's still felt it's quite on this kind of pilot stage. We haven't yet had this huge wave of solutions that, for example, 3D printing of housing or something, but the interest is there, but we haven't had a breakthrough yet. So from the VC and that industry, it is tricky, but if there's a model and a path where we can see that there is a financial upside, but so far there hasn't been too many good examples, unfortunately. But we do look at actively. I know there's one Finnish 3D construction company that just received an investment as well. So there are those examples existing.
Excellent. Just on that note, we had a very interesting startup coming out of Founder Institute Nordics. They are in construction tech, building something called Fleximan. So I'll connect them with you, Claes. And Claes Mikko, if you could also write here, because there are some requests of how can people get in touch with you. If you have a public email or LinkedIn profile, you can always put that into the chat so that people can take contact with you. And in the meantime, a question to the audience as well. If somebody wants to come on stage and have a live question before we close off in about 5-7 minutes, let me know. Just write just say that on chat. I'd like to come on stage. Then I can pick you and we can have a short conversation. If you have a question for Claes Mikko. But we have a question here from Per. Would you consider yourself an active or a passive investor, or a mix of both? If active, how do you define?
If you could reply the question, like the active or passive investor. So we have any role. We don't have a strict model to lead or co-lead or be passive. So we have the full flexibility there. So yeah, if that's more or less answering. So that's it's case by case. If we experience that our team can take through the whole investment process and we can add value there, then yeah, happy to do the lead as well.
Got it. And then Nazanin has a question. What about SaaS BPM? Are you interested in that kind of business?
Yeah, sure. We haven't yet done any detailed like the opportunity is there and always case by case. So unfortunately, I have to say that yes, we're interested there as well.
Okay. Then we take one more question here from Felix. Okay, I could have missed that in the first half because he just joined a little while ago. What KPIs do you think are most important to track or show a VC in deep tech? If there is any in common at all over, if there's any in common at all over different companies. So, okay, so what I make of it, is there any common KPIs or set of KPIs?
I come up with at least three. So the number one is the team. So if the team has been able to, for example, one of the most important slides is the team slide, not about the history, but about the narrative, what the team members have been executing. So is it like we mentioned Nokia, like member of Nokia for 15 years, that is not interesting, but being their description of a one-liner built at place X, this and that. So that always helps, like showing once again that the person, the team is being able to execute something in advance. That always helps. So the team element for this kind of deep tech category, and despite there's haven't been any massive successes previously, but being able to show and showing that dynamics, that is the personal chemistry as well, what actually helps. Second is the classic patents. University and these space, they help a lot when it comes to protecting these ones. That is something we always ask as well. It's not always necessary, but when it's deep tech, then typically that is needed. So to what extent, how protective, how unique is it? But then last, the third, one of the KPIs, as we mentioned, like how does the market look at it? So is it an innovation that it's just that problem description, or is it just that solution? Then yeah, it's a combination. So having some kind of feedback. Is it something that is not too academic or just too hard or futuristic? So when do we see the flying cars category happening or not? Okay. So yeah, it's gonna happen. We're looking forward to it. But we don't have the resources necessary, not always, to take it for the next 10 to 20 years to make that happen. Luckily, flying cars are already happening much faster than that. So
yeah, great. Thank you, Claes Mikko. And Felix, you got the answer. Yes, thank you. I think we have a couple of more minutes to wrap up. And here I'll go into, because you talked about being a pitch moderator, and if you would like to share some insights with our audience based on that experience.
Oh, yeah. So that's always about the stage. So, but I guess it's always always what is your audience? Nigel, you know all about it. So how do you make the discussion of yours resonate with the audience that you have? Is it your family? Is it a big audience of startup entrepreneurs? Is it investors? Is it potential customers? So it's surprisingly common how often we see presentations done only for customer prospects. Buy this because it is X. And it's just like when you pitch to an investor, you have to remember that you're actually trying to get a team member. So it's more about this kind of not just you want to make that person part of your vision, but also like how could that contribute and make themselves feel valuing add. It's not just capital. So there's a lot of pitch on stage. You have to remember that we're getting back to that again after COVID, but it's a good show. Main thing about main stage pitching, it's like, how do you as a person handle, for example, big audiences? And if something goes wrong, that's the best case. Like if there's a stress test, if the microphone doesn't work, if something fails, how do you react? That's like, you can see the angels or VCs like check when there's something handled in a good situation. And then, but the classic, of course, like getting to those meetings and pitching and resonating that. So if you have the possibility, have a good understanding of the counterpart, maybe have something to bridge that discussion to that person or team as well. That always helps. But yeah, I would say like one as well, like ugly slide, that's not a problem. It's always like the content. So our job is to see through and see what is the possibility. So if you're not a visual person, then just take a good font and make it clear and simple and just not overdo it. It is hard to simplify things. It takes a lot of time, but some of us have the magic. So that is yeah. Step-by-step building up this kind of a commitment. So from simple to advanced.
Brilliant. Very interesting point on like it's hard to simplify. And I actually, during the flow of your conversation, I picked another nuggets where you talked about getting investors and thinking of them as team members. I don't hear that that too often, because whenever startups are thinking about getting investors, they're thinking about the money itself. But that's an interesting perspective, that you're actually getting a team member to help you build something. So that's an important perspective, just came out of the talk. So keep that in mind. That's my word to the community. Claes Mikko, thank you so much for taking time out for joining Startup Grind Stockholm. We'll be in touch with more future talking opportunities here, Founder Institute and other platforms. And thank you so much for everyone to join us here. Have a great lunch going forward, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day.